It was supposed to be a joyful celebration, our annual family party, a night where everyone gathered, laughed, and shared memories. I had been looking forward to it for weeks, eager to see relatives I hadn't spoken to in a while. But I never imagined that the night would end like this. I had just stepped out to grab a drink when I noticed something off. The music, the chatter. It all felt distant for a moment. My eyes scanned the room, searching for Sarah, my wife. She was laughing, but something was wrong. My heart skipped a beat when I saw her. Not with her usual group of friends, but with someone else. And not just anyone. It was Alex, a man I knew all too well. He was a longtime friend of mine, someone I had trusted, someone I thought would never betray me like this. They were standing close, too close. Their laughter, their body language, it wasn't just friendly. There was something more, something intimate about the way they looked at each other. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Sarah's eyes met mine for a split second, and the smile on her face faltered. But before she could look away, Alex put his arm around her. The scene played out like a slap in the face, the betrayal hitting me harder than anything I had ever felt before. The room felt like it had closed in on me. The music now a dull hum as everything around me seemed to freeze. I couldn't tear my eyes away from Sarah and Alex. My mind raced, but everything felt like it was happening in slow motion. Sarah was laughing, no, giggling, as Alex whispered something in her ear. I watched as her head tilted slightly, her eyes bright with interest. She leaned in closer to him, their faces mere inches apart. And then, as if instinctively, she placed her hand on his chest, holding him there. I felt my stomach churn, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't just the casual closeness between friends. This was something different. Her hand lingered on his chest just a second too long, and when he spoke, his lips brushed her ear in a way that was unmistakably intimate. I could see the subtle way Alex moved closer, his body nearly flush with hers. Their chemistry was undeniable. They didn't just look like two people talking, they looked like two people who had shared more than words. I had seen this type of behavior before, but never with someone so close to me. The way they were touching, the way their faces were drawn together in whispered conversation, it was more than friendly. I felt a cold rush of panic. The images in my head started to overwhelm me. What was going on between them? How long had this been happening? My body was frozen in place, and yet every nerve screamed for me to move, to confront them, but I couldn't. I was stuck, my feet cemented to the floor. Sarah smiled at something Alex said, her eyes twinkling, and I saw her shift even closer to him. She tilted her head just enough that their lips were nearly touching. I could see the glint of something in her eyes, a connection, a spark, that had never been there when she looked at me. In that moment, I felt as though I was no longer a part of her life, no longer the man she wanted. It felt as if she had already made her choice. I couldn't bear to watch any longer. The betrayal was too much, but I couldn't look away. My mind was still processing what was happening in front of me. My wife, my trusted friend, both of them caught in a moment I couldn't undo. The room felt as if it were closing in on me. The once lively music and chatter faded into the background as I fixated on Sarah and Alex. My mind was spinning, my body frozen, as the image of them together burned into my mind. Sarah was laughing. a laugh I hadn't heard in a while, one that felt too carefree, too intimate. Alex was standing just a little too close, his hand on her arm in a way that didn't seem like a casual touch. It wasn't just friendly. There was something in the way they moved together, something that felt too comfortable, too familiar for my liking. I watched them closely, how Sarah seemed completely at ease in Alex's presence, how their conversation was private, as if they were the only ones in the room. She tilted her head toward him, and he responded with a smile that was just a little too warm. As she leaned in slightly, her body was positioned in a way that made it clear their connection wasn't just platonic. The atmosphere around them seemed to shift. It wasn't just a shared joke or a friendly conversation anymore. It felt like something more. She was touching his arm gently as they spoke, and he, in return, was leaning in a bit closer than necessary, his eyes locked on hers. It was the kind of closeness that made my heart sink, the kind that I had only shared with her before. It made me feel like an outsider in my own life, watching as the woman I had trusted let someone else into the space I thought was only ours. I could feel my chest tightening as the realization set in. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. There was something going on between them, something I wasn't a part of. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. How long had this been going on? Was this something more than a fleeting moment? I couldn't look away, though every part of me wanted to. It felt as though I was standing outside of myself, witnessing something I couldn't control. Sarah wasn't just laughing with him, she was engaging with him in a way that made it clear she had crossed a line. And in that moment, I knew something had changed. I was no longer the person she needed to feel close to, and it hurt more than I could have ever imagined. I stood there, in the corner, my heart hammering in my chest, as the reality of the situation hit me. I watched Sarah and Alex interact like they had forgotten I was even there. The casual touch, the shared glances, the way their conversation flowed effortlessly. It was all too much to bear. My hands clenched into fists, and I had to fight the urge to storm over and confront them both right there in front of everyone. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was paralyzed, caught between the rage that surged through my veins and the betrayal that seemed to suffocate me. I had never felt more powerless, more helpless in my entire life. I should have walked over to them. I should have demanded answers right then and there. But something held me back. Maybe it was the fear of exposing everything in front of our family. Maybe it was the shock of seeing something I had never expected. Sarah, the woman I had married, the woman I trusted, so at ease with someone else. I kept telling myself that I was overreacting, that maybe I had misread the situation, but deep down, I knew better. This wasn't just a friendly interaction. This was something else. And I was going to have to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity, as I watched Sarah and Alex grow more comfortable, more intimate in their interactions. I could see the way Sarah's body language had changed, how she leaned toward him, how her smile was brighter, more natural than it had been in months. It wasn't just the distance between us growing. It was, well, the way she had replaced me with him. And then, as if she had sensed me watching, Sarah turned slightly, her gaze meeting mine for the briefest of moments. Her smile faltered, just for a second, before she quickly looked away. clearly startled. But instead of confronting me, she looked back at Alex, who didn't seem bothered at all by what had just happened. He laughed, his hand brushing hers casually, and I couldn't help but wonder how long this had been going on. My blood boiled. Every part of me screamed to walk over there and demand the truth, to ask her, to demand an explanation for what I was seeing. But I stood frozen, unsure of what to say, how to even begin the conversation. And in that moment, I realized that confronting her now wouldn't be enough. This wasn't just a matter of catching her in the act. It was the realization that everything I had built with her was a lie. She had already chosen him, long before I'd ever walked in and caught them together. I couldn't take it anymore. The silence was deafening, and I was suffocating in it. My heart was racing, my mind spinning with a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and betrayal. Sarah and Alex were still engaged in their own little world, oblivious to my presence, as if nothing had changed. I couldn't stand being the invisible man in my own life, unable to act. The longer I stood there watching them share private moments, the more my anger turned into something darker, something that had been building deep inside me for months. The realization hit me hard. This wasn't just an affair. It was the destruction of everything I had believed in, and I wasn't going to let it go. I turned on my heel and stormed out of the room, heading straight for the back door. The cold air hit my face as I stepped outside, but it wasn't enough to cool the fire burning inside me. My thoughts were racing. Images of Sarah and Alex together, of the life we had once shared, of the love that had been completely shattered. It was clear to me now. I couldn't confront her in front of everyone, but I had to confront her, and I would do it on my terms. I couldn't stand there anymore pretending like everything was fine. I needed answers. I needed to make sure she understood the consequences of what she had done. As I stood outside, my breath coming in short bursts, I made a decision. The confrontation would come, but not like this. I wasn't just going to yell at her and demand answers. I wasn't going to let her off with a few apologies and empty promises. No, this was bigger. I would make her feel the weight of what she had done. When I walked back inside, I was a different man. There was no fear in me now, only a cold, calculated resolve. I walked past Sarah and Alex without saying a word, my gaze never wavering. But Sarah saw the change in me. She knew something was different. She could feel the shift in the air, and as I made my way toward the kitchen, I could hear her call after me. "Ryan, wait! Where are you going?" But I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She knew I had seen enough. She knew the game was up. It wasn't about talking anymore. It was about actions. And what I did next would change everything. I could hear Sarah's footsteps behind me as I made my way to the kitchen. She was calling my name, but I didn't turn around. I knew she was panicking, feeling the weight of my silence pressing down on her. But I needed this moment, this cold distance between us, to make the next move, to show her the consequences of what she had chosen. I reached the kitchen counter and grabbed the papers I had been preparing for days. The divorce papers, the prenup, everything that would seal our fate. The reality was simple. She had made her choice, and now I was going to make mine. There was no going back. Sarah finally caught up with me, standing just a few feet behind, her breath uneven. Ryan, please, she said, her voice trembling. Don't do this. I can explain. I turned slowly, meeting her eyes for the first time since I had walked out. The desperation in her eyes was almost too much to bear, but I had to stay strong. I had to make her understand that this was beyond her excuses. Explain? I repeated, my voice low and steady. How do you explain this, Sarah? How do you explain betraying me in front of everyone, in front of my own family? You've already made your explanation clear. She took a step forward, reaching out as if she could touch me. Comfort me. But I stepped back, not wanting her near me. No, Sarah. You don't get to fix this. You don't get to make it all go away with a few words. Her face crumpled, her hand dropping to her side as she sank into a chair at the table. I'm sorry, Ryan, she whispered, tears beginning to fall. I never meant to hurt you. I never thought it would get this far. I told you before, I said, walking toward her slowly, letting my presence loom over her. This is bigger than you. You've already crossed a line I can't forget. What happened tonight is just the start. The start of you losing everything you thought you had. I pulled out the prenup and divorce papers and slid them across the table toward her. Sign them, because this is your reality now. I'm not going to pretend this never happened, and I'm not going to pretend I don't know what you've been doing behind my back. Her hands trembled as she reached for the papers, her face a mixture of disbelief and shame. Please, please, Ryan, don't take everything from me. I stood there, unwavering, watching as she realized the full weight of her actions. You did that, Sarah, not me. The air between us grew heavy as Sarah's hand hovered over the papers, but she didn't sign them right away. She stared at them for what felt like an eternity, her face pale, her mind racing, and I could see the weight of everything crashing down on her. But I wasn't going to let her off easy. Not after everything. Go ahead, Sarah, I said, my voice colder than I intended, but I didn't care. Sign them. It's the only way out of this mess. The only way you can even pretend like you have control of your life again. I could see her chest rising and falling rapidly, her breathing shallow as she fought back the tears. She looked at the papers, then back at me. I don't want this. I never wanted this, she whispered, her voice cracking. Please, Ryan, don't do this. I can't lose you. I'll do anything to make this right. Make it right? I repeated, taking a step closer. You think you can just fix this with a few words? A few apologies? I watched you with him, Sarah. I watched you fall into his arms like you never even cared about me. You've already made your choice. She looked at me with eyes filled with regret, but it was too late for regret. The damage was done, and I had already made up my mind. No, Ryan, she pleaded. Please, I'll stop seeing him. I'll go to counseling. We can fix this. I love you. I do. Don't let one mistake ruin everything. Her words were desperate, but they didn't have the weight they once did. The love we had shared, the trust we had built, it had all been destroyed in an instant. I couldn't just forget what I'd seen. I couldn't unsee the intimacy between her and Alex. And no amount of pleading was going to erase that from my mind. You can't fix this, Sarah, I said, my voice firm. But there was a heaviness in my chest. You've already made your choice. I'm done trying to rebuild what's broken. You don't get to keep everything. You don't get to keep me. And you don't get to keep our life together. You gave all that up when you chose him over me. The silence that followed was suffocating. The weight of my words hung in the air like a thick fog. I could see the realization settling in, the understanding that she had lost it all: her marriage, her trust, her life with me. And I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. I had to be strong. I had to take control back. This was my revenge, my way of reclaiming what she had taken from me. And as much as it hurt, I couldn't go back. Sarah sat motionless, the weight of what I had said settling heavily on her shoulders. She was still clutching the papers in her hands, her eyes fixed on them as if they were the last shred of hope she had left. But in reality, those papers were the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. She didn't sign them right away. Instead, she wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself, but her hands were shaking, betraying her calm exterior. For a moment, I thought she might still try to beg me, try to offer me some solution, some way to fix things. But when she looked up at me, her face was filled with something else: resignation. "I know you won't forgive me, Ryan," she said, her voice quieter now, but the finality in it stung just as much as any of the harsh words I had thrown at her. "I don't expect you to, but I never meant to hurt you this way. I never thought I'd lose everything." I stared at her, but there was no compassion left in me. The love, the trust, it was gone. Every word she said seemed hollow, like a last-ditch effort to grasp onto something that wasn't there anymore. The truth was, she had already made her choice. And now I was the one who had to make mine. I nodded slowly, my heart heavy, but my mind unwavering. "It's over, Sarah. I'm done pretending. This is where it ends." I watched as she took a deep breath and signed the papers. It wasn't just a signature on a document. It was the end of our life together, the end of everything we had worked for. And even though part of me wanted to scream, to lash out, I stayed calm. I stayed in control. As she signed the final line, she looked up at me one last time. Her eyes were filled with a mix of pain and something else. Regret, perhaps, or maybe acceptance. But it didn't matter. She had already crossed a line I could never unsee. "You've made your bed," I said, the finality in my voice ringing through the quiet room. "Now you'll lie in it." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her behind. I had done what needed to be done. The revenge was complete. The weight of the betrayal was finally lifted, but there was no satisfaction in it, no joy, just emptiness. But at least, for the first time in months, I could breathe again. The days that followed were a blur. The house, once filled with the sound of laughter, now felt eerily quiet. The silence that hung between Sarah and me was deafening, and yet it was the only thing that felt real anymore. She had left. I had watched her go, her belongings packed into the car, her face one of guilt and sorrow. But no words could change what had happened. It was over. I spent the following weeks in a haze, trying to come to terms with everything that had unfolded. There were moments when I wondered if I had done the right thing. But every time I thought about the betrayal, about how I had been blind to the signs, the anger and hurt would resurface. I realized I couldn't have stayed in that life any longer. The woman I had loved, the woman I thought I knew, had been hiding someone else behind my back. And no matter how much I wanted to forgive her, I couldn't. Trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. The days slowly started to feel like they had meaning again. I rediscovered parts of myself that had been buried for too long. I spent more time with my friends, went out for walks, and even picked up hobbies I had neglected over the years. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I caught myself thinking about Sarah, wondering how she was, if she regretted what she'd done. But then I reminded myself of one thing. I had given her every chance to make things right, and she had chosen a path that led us here. I wasn't angry anymore. What I felt now was something more powerful: freedom. The burden of the betrayal was heavy at first, but as time went on, it began to lift. I realized that I didn't need Sarah to define my happiness. I could build my life again, piece by piece, stronger and more resilient than before. In the end, my revenge wasn't about punishing her. It was about a back control of my life. I had been lost for so long in the shadow of her lies that I had forgotten who I was. But now I was free.